Because if you practice it in your mind, and then it's no different than actually you doing it for real, but you can do this 10,000 times in your mind, anywhere.
Hey everyone, Ricky here, back with another video. Have you ever felt stuck or wanted to change but felt like you couldn't? Well, today's video is for you. Today we go over with Dr. Nicole LePera on how to change and get unstuck to be a better version of yourself.
So the reason why many of us are stuck lives in the part of our brain that I'm always going on and on about, part of our mind, which is called the subconscious. Most standard example we all can relate to. I'm driving that car home, right? And I'm thinking about the argument I just had with my boss, and whoop, I just arrived at home. And I don't really remember my drive home. How did I get home alive? Oh, thank God, my subconscious drove me home. So that's the prime example of this subconscious. The reason why we can't change lives in that subconscious, because 95% of our day, unbeknownst to most of us, we're allowing that autopilot to dictate what we're doing with our day, which is why it feels very Groundhog Day. Like I was saying earlier, we tend to be very habitual and live very habitually. So the Future Self Journal is a technique that I came up with when I was starting to question, or when I was starting to first realize the power of this subconscious and really starting to, engage with the idea of changing it. So what the journal is, it's a daily practice that I began for myself before I put templates together and shared it with the world, where every morning, very early on in my journey, I would use, I never was a journaler even, so this was all new for me, but I used the power of writing an intention to change each and every day. So every day I wrote, and I wrote as if whatever change I wanted to see in my life was already the case. And what I started to realize was that one of two things are really powerful in that process. The first one is this simple act of intending to do something different. So I did my journaling in the morning, set me up throughout that day to keep that a little bit closer to top of mind so that I might actually make that new choice later in my day, to avoid slipping right from awake to autopilot. Because autopilot isn't going to make a new choice. Even if logically I've already come to terms with the fact that I need to change in this area, right? Autopilot is going to do what autopilot has always done. So the act of writing new, an intention every morning, for me really helped increase the likelihood that I would begin to practice this new habit. Also, very sneakily, writing as if it's already true was harnessing a reality of our mind, which is it does not know the difference between what is real and what is imagined. So the act of writing in present tense as if this change already happened, right? So for instance, I spent a lot of time being dissociated, disconnected. So I spent a lot of time journaling every morning about being conscious. That's the opposite, if you will, of dissociated. That wasn't true for me in the beginning, but as I was writing it, I'm laying down some new neural pathways. And our brain is what we refer to, probably a word many of us have heard of, neuroplastic. So it's changeable. So now I'm writing and I'm mentally rehearsing, and I'm actually helping my brain form some new network. So that, in addition to the intention, the consistent daily intention to change, now I'm creating some momentum, and I'm creating a pathway of change in my actual brain, which I can harness to create actual change then in my behavior.
Do you keep saying this to yourself every single morning until it becomes the new default operating system?
I suggest at least 30 days. However, a lot of these new patterns take much more than 30 days. So yeah, it would be something it's very repetitive, right? So every morning I would work on that one area. So for me, I spent well more than 30 days trying to become conscious, connect it, and I would just write it every morning and practice it every day until that became more or less my new normal, my new autopilot. And it took a very long time because I was dissociated for a very long time. This is where patience is key. However, there's so much progress along the way, where you have moments of consciousness that is incredibly motivating to keep you going. But I always say that because this isn't a magic journal. This isn't a quick fix. Right? I don't write it, close my journal, and poof, I'm now this new person. It's just a tool to create that repetitive, consistent change. And it is so incredibly impactful as we harness it.
Great. And we'll get the link from you later, and we'll drop it in the notes below.
Absolutely.
Now, In that video that I saw, you had two prompts. The first prompt was, I am grateful for, this is part of your future self journal. And the second prompt was 3 traits of the future self, ... And you would write that down. And then you go and you repeat this over and over. And then eventually this becomes your new reality. I'm fascinated by this kind of stuff, neuroscience. I'm just curious, what is the science behind that you can't tell the difference between reality and what is imagined?
Yeah, so I mean, we are creating, our brain is it's an active, our mind is an active process. Like we are creating and constructing. I mean, as trippy as this might sound for a lot of listeners, everything from the perceptions we're having in any moment, it's all being generated, from our mind with little neurons, and keep it really simple, little neurons that are firing, neurons that fire together, wire together. We've all heard of those. That's what I mean when I say networks, right? So whether or not it's because I'm thinking about what I'm doing, or if I'm just sitting here thinking about what I wish I was doing, to my mind, all of the neurons are firing as if I'm doing it. And the most fascinating research is they've now, it's called mental rehearsal, if anyone is interested, and they've studied it really extensively. And they'll study it often in sports, where they'll have sports, oftentimes basketball players, foul shooting, doing free throws, visualizing it. And that actually even neurons in the motor cortex, right? So the areas of the brain that are activated when we're actually moving, if we're envisioning that we're moving, so I'm shooting my hoops, shooting a basketball, those neurons are, my arm isn't moving now while I'm doing that, but the neurons are firing as if my arm is moving. So that's the power of the mind. And it really comes down to, mental events that are just neuron cells that are firing and then connecting with each other. Even if it's not mapping on to my external reality in that moment, in my mind, it's alive as if it is, which is where we create change. Because when we're mentally rehearsing something that's new or that we want to be better at, right, we're just giving that network more and more practice, like at the gym.
Wow, I think we just stepped into the Matrix here.
It can get really trippy.
That science fiction can be real, and that Neo is sitting in the chair and then he wakes up and he's like, I know Kung Fu. Because if you practice it in your mind, then it's no different than actually you doing it for real, but you can do this 10,000 times in your mind, anywhere.
Yes.
Okay.
I still suggest, and the reality still is, translating that practice to real life, because for a lot of us, we have fears wrapped up in this, like, oh, if I show up in this new way, what'll happen? So it's obviously much more complicated than just visualize something and then it happens. It gets much more psychologically complicated, but doing that mental practice will help set us up to achieve then that success in real life.
Mm-hmm. There's this thing that happens a lot within the creative community where we want to explore lots of new, crazy, cool, interesting things. We want to make a video. We want to start an Instagram account. We want to go and give a talk or something like that. And that intention, they say out loud, like, yeah, I want to do this, but then there's no follow through with the action. And I feel like people are suffering from this paralysis by analysis, this fear of making mistakes. How could we apply some of the concepts you just talked about to help them get over this? Because I think if more creative people just were able to put into action what they were thinking, it would be a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times we become paralyzed through analysis because many of us attempt so desperately to, solve our problems or whatever it is, right? From our mind, right? And the reality of it is we could really paint ourselves into a corner because I can make a really elaborate argument for and against the same thing that I'm considering. And that's how we become paralyzed, because we're listening to our mind and trying to weigh, like a court case, right? Evidence in favor, and whatever side wins, right? That's what I'm going to pick to do. Sometimes we even factor in our friends or our loved ones' opinions into our court case, into our, into our jury box to decide. The reality of it is we all have a space from which our best decisions come. That it's not actually coming from our mind at all. It's coming from our deeper, more intuitive, kind of guttural center that many of us have lost touch with. So a first step, is really starting to decrease the overall amount of time we're spending in our minds, or the amount of time we're using our mind, our thinking, to determine our course of action, and beginning to spend, again, this is a process, more and more time dropped into our bodies, because our body is going to be the speaker. That's where the wisdom that I'm speaking of the intuition, or, our deepest knowledge and knowing comes from. So the reality is we feel our way into our best decisions, our best creative projects, less than we think our way. A lot of us have a sense of not being worthy. A lot of us are responding to maybe real wounds, especially artists. Did we come from environments that fostered our creativity, or were we given messages that were, anti it, or, whatever it is. A lot of us have narratives about ourselves or our creation or our place in the world that's not always conducive to putting out our work. So if you're someone like that, again, it's doing that deeper work. It's unconditioning ourselves from operating under those beliefs that might have been real for us at a time and a place, and maybe painful for us at a time and a place, but allowing us to create a future that's different, that we can be confident in ourselves and our work, and then walking through the fear that comes with putting out anything. As a creative, I understand this. Every time I put out a post, it's like, it feels like you're really being vulnerable and opening yourself up to feedback. And nothing teaches, in my opinion, like the wisdom of doing something uncomfortable. So, we work us, we understand, we connect into our body to use that for our guidance, and it still might be uncomfortable. And we still might feel vulnerable when we put our work out there. And then it's just about doing it and doing it and doing it and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
That was just the nicest, most professional way of saying, shut up and just do it. And I love that. I like it. So you heard it from Dr. Nicole LePera, and you can listen to the whole part, or you can just do it, because you can talk about it, you can think about it all you want, but nothing teaches like experience and then reflecting on that experience, right?
And that does it for today's video, everyone. Thanks for watching. We're gonna leave a list of resources below in the description if you guys wanna do some further reading or some further watching. I'm gonna link the full live stream right there. And for me, I guess today, this was a huge mindset thing, because once you get your mind right, once you can change your mindset, your actions will follow. So that was my big takeaway for today, is if you wanna do anything, starts right up there. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you in the next video.